School Board is being conducted in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D.021, meetings by telephone or other electronic means. The school board meeting is being recorded. Access to the recording will be made available on the district's website as soon as it is possible. Very limited viewing space is also being provided here at the DAO for the public, utilizing proper medical screening questions and social distancing. This meeting is also being live streamed. We will start off our meeting with our mission statement. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today and tomorrow's society. School board members, please remember to mute your microphones when you're not speaking. During tonight's meeting, a board member may use the chat option when wanting to make a comment or ask a question. Board Vice Chair Shannon Haas will assist me and will be monitoring the chat during tonight's meeting, or I will probably just do round robin like I've been doing in the past. We will call our meeting to order. 6:32, June 17th, 2020. We're at the DAO and remote locations. Les, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Les. And now could you entertain us with roll call, and please make sure the members state their location and the reason why they are appearing remotely, so we are in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D.02, subdivision 6.
Jeff Polreis.
I am here at the DAO as the chair should be.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Here I am. I am in my house because we are still in a pandemic.
Al Dahlgren.
Room 110, district office. Governor told me to.
Shannon Haas.
I'm here at the district office, still social distancing.
Natalie Ringsmuth. I can't read your lips, but that's okay. You're here.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Is that why you asked me if I could read lips, Jeff?
I pressed the wrong button. Hey, it's me. I'm in St. Cloud due to COVID.
Okay, thank you. Zach Dorhold.
Present at my home in St. Cloud due to COVID.
Okay. Les Green is at the DOA in room 128, governor's orders. Also in attendance, I believe, I will call these off, Willie Jett, Superintendent of District 742 Schools, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Marcia Boysch, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch, Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, Carol Potter, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, Assessment, and Enrollment, Dr. Sylvia Huff, Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji, Executive Director of Human Resources, Tracy Flynn Bowe, Director of Community Engagement and Communication, Tammy DeLand, and Executive Assistant, Mary Kusterman, is in attendance. Thank you all. I think that's it, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Les. First up is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board routinely adopts without debate. Any single member of the board may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. The full text of items can be found at the end of the agenda. On tonight, we have item number A, approval of tonight's agenda. Item number B, approval of minutes for the meetings we had on May 20th and June 3rd. Item C, approval of payments and bills and other financial transactions in the amount of $2,440,885.88. Item D, approval of staff and personnel changes. Item E, acceptance of grant awards and donations. Item F, contract award for transportation. Item G, Tech High School change orders totaling $33,420.80. Item H, Apple lease purchase agreement. At this time, I'm looking for a motion to accept the consent agenda as recorded.
So moved.
Natalie, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Shannon. Any discussion? Seeing none, Les, could you take roll, please?
Couldn't find the mic.
No problem.
Les Green is yes. Zach Dorholt,
Yeah.
Natalie Ringsmove,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Jeff Polrice.
Yes. All right, thank you, Les. We will jump into our information items. Item number 2A is a 10-year long-term maintenance plan. It's going to be presented by Amy Scullerud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Polrice, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. And Gary and I will actually be presenting together. We're getting the PowerPoint up right now. This is an item that comes to the board annually, but we're doing it a little bit different this time. In the past, we usually just bring it right for approval. It has to be approved and sent to the Department of Education by the end of July. What we're doing just to be a little bit more proactive and make sure that the board has a high level of comfort with the plan and the amount that we're budgeting prior to it coming for approval is we're bringing it in two pieces. We're bringing kind of an overview of our 10-year facility need and our anticipated or proposed levy amount and budget amount tonight for discussion and questions, and then it will come back to the board for approval in July. So just an overview of the long-term facilities maintenance program. Long-term facilities maintenance, also referred to as LTFM, which is what we'll use just for simplicity throughout the presentation. The revenue and the formula for this funding source is all set by statute through the legislature. The revenue comes from two sources, levy and aid, but the aid component is really quite small. The significant portion of this funding is from levy. And the current LTFM program, for those who've been on the board for a number of years, replaced the previous alternative facility and deferred maintenance health and safety levies. So a lot of those that language throughout the state is still used kind of interchangeably, and health and safety is still kind of a separate term that is within the LTFM program, and we'll get to that in a minute. So going to the next slide. There are three allowable uses for LTFM funds. ADA, so increasing accessibility, is an allowed use. Approved health and safety expenditures, which the statute is referenced there, are very specific items. And so a lot of times people hear health and safety and they think anything that's safety related ties in. So, is a secure entrance health and safety, things of that nature come up a lot. Health and safety isn't just anything under the general umbrella of safety. It's really what's specified in that statute, which is primarily kind of certain categorical items, fire safety, hazardous materials, asbestos removal, indoor air quality, those sorts of items. And so just to clarify that health and safety is a pretty narrow window of what's allowable under that statute. And then the third allowable use, which is what the majority of our budget goes to, is what's historically referred to as more of the deferred maintenance type of projects that are necessary to prevent erosion of facilities. A few caveats with that: it has to be a district-owned facility. So if a district is renting space somewhere, You can't use your LTFM money to make improvements to leased space. You can't remodel. So if you want to knock down walls or change a functional use of a space, that's not allowable. You can't add square footage or increase space, and no new construction. So this year, we had an outside company come in. We contracted with ICS to do a detailed 10-year plan with cost estimates so that we have a really true, accurate picture of what's our 10-year needs within our facilities and how does that align with what we're currently levying and what our budget is, and what's the condition, what are our high priority projects. We're not going to go through the full facilities assessment report. It is in the board agenda packet, and you'll notice that it goes by building. And so each building has a 2-page summary, 1 page that in narrative form identifies and outlines some of those main projects that are need to be on the radar and our priorities. And then the second page takes each category of facilities projects and rates the buildings on a scale of 1 to 10. Anything of 3 or less, you'll see notated in red, is identified as being a high priority item. Projects that are well past useful life, that are really needing to be addressed in the immediate future. Overall, when you look through that report, our buildings are really sitting in pretty good condition. You're not going to see a lot of red. And most of the items that are in red are already on the radar as needing to be replaced. One of those items, for example, is the Discovery Roof project that is already slated for next summer of 21, and as part of the 2021 LTFM budget. Another item is the Apollo Roof. That, as we get to the project list, you'll see is slated for the 2022 budget that we're looking at tonight. And then the only other projects that are identified in red is McKinley for accessibility, because it doesn't have an elevator. And so that is one that we'll start to have internal discussions about whether that's something we want to proceed with adding. And so it's not identified on the list at this point, because that takes a fair amount of time to figure out where that would go. How does that impact space, and if they're going to lose space as a result of that. And then the other item that's identified on the list is the remaining HVAC replacements at Talahi, Discovery, and Oak Hill. And so you'll see in just a minute, we'll flip to the next slide, and you'll see the 10-year expenditure projection. And so this is small when it's being projected here, but it's also in the board agenda packet. Essentially, what you'll see is a large amount showing up right now in 2023. That's not confirmed that that's going to be a 2023 expense, or that we're levying for that at this point. This is really just ICS's report of if we're going to do all of the things that need to be done in 10 years, what does that equate to in terms of dollars? And so you'll see within our annual levy, which currently is set at $6,785,000 for 2021. With that as a current levy, we obviously have more expenditures over the 10-year plan than what our current levy can support. And the primary cause of that is that HVAC replacement at those 3 schools. And so for those who've been on the board for a while and were around when we issued bonds to do the first round of HVAC projects, the board approved issuing $37 million in alternative facility bonds. And that was in 2015. That was identified again at that time as being projects that were really not sustainable within our current levy. And so outside of that, if you take that 2023 amount kind of and take that off out of the equation, our current levy, which right now, like I said, is set at $6,785,000. We're proposing an increase. We'll get to that in a minute based on conversation and discussion at Board Finance Committee. So outside of the HVAC projects, we're really sitting in a point where our current levy authority puts us in a good situation to address all of the facility needs that we anticipate for the next 10 years. The conversation about how do we do those HVAC replacements, knowing that they're identified as high priority, isn't a conversation for tonight. It's not anything that will come as part of the 21-22 LTFM approval, but more just an awareness for board members that at some point down the road, we may need to discuss the possibility of issuing bonds to cover the cost of those projects, like we did a number of years ago to do the rest of the district HVAC. If you go to the next slide then. So when we originally went to Board Finance Committee, like I said, the current year levy is set at $6,785,000. We had preliminarily proposed an increase to bring that to $7 million, which can be done levy neutral without any sort of tax impact, because we have some additional debt excess adjustments. So our debt service levy is projected to go down next year. And so to kind of those two would offset each other and would allow us to levy $7 million. When we discussed this at Board Finance Committee, and based on the recommendations and the facility needs that are identified annually, as we project this out, we're really looking at those annual needs being closer to 7.5 million and, potentially increasing slightly each year. And particularly one of the things that has come up a number of times lately is curb appeal and just the aesthetic of our buildings and making sure that they're, really inviting and really updated and have that welcoming, updated feel. And so the consensus at Board Finance Committee was to increase that so that we have some additional funds to be able to do to cover our anticipated costs and make sure that we can address those items that are on the radar. Just as as kind of a rough estimate in terms of what that would relate to for tax impact, there's a lot of factors that play into our taxes. Obviously, tax capacity, property values, enrollment. At most, if all other things constant, that would equate to just under a 2% increase. However, this could very likely end up being levy neutral, depending on what happens with enrollment come fall, or other factors. There's just so many factors that go into the levy. It's hard to pinpoint that exactly, but on the maximum that would impact would be just under 2%. So before we get into we'll pause here for 1 second. So just one other thing to point out. So you'll see the annual expenditures there at 7.5 million. And then in addition to that, we have existing debt service payments on that 2015 bond that was issued for the other HVAC projects. And so that brings the total LTFM revenue to $10,283,622. So we can either pause here and answer questions about that needs assessment before we go into the proposed 21-22 projects, or we can go through the projects and do questions at the end. Do people have a preference?
Let's pause here and let board members ask questions for that part, Amy.
Perfect.
Shannon, you want to start? Do you have any questions?
Mike, I'll hold off on my questions because they're about the project.
Well, Monica, you'd be up next, please.
So Amy, thank you, Chair Boris. Amy, at some point, I was asking I wanted to understand how the plans were made for the expenditure of this money. And so wanted to understand, like in the long term, not only what the state is mandating us, but how we kind of plan that ahead. Is that the needs assessment that you are telling us about?
Yes. So we can do some of those internal assessments ourselves, but sometimes you need somebody with more of that expert lens on various systems. And so that's exactly what the needs assessment tells us. We'll have at the end of it, it's still, what was attached in the agenda is really just the report, the building page summaries. But we'll end up with a full report that lists every building and the year that they're projecting we should do each project based on when it extends past useful life, or when it becomes a priority in relation to other projects. And so all of that detail is there for us then. We'll also be taking that detailed list of projects and just for accountability and tracking, we'll then maintain our own database of all of those identified projects and when they're completed, so that we have that list of projects, both for district purposes and for the board and the general public for accountability, to show that when projects are identified as being done, as being needed, that we're completing them. So we have all of that detail.
So, and a follow-up for that, one of the recurrent topics that has come to the board is that we sometimes wanted to do things that have to do with maintenance, but not exactly, because they will go into renovation kind of funding. And I wonder if that, if when we have that needs assessment completed with the report, if we could have a section that is only for the use of the board that has these proposed renovation things that will not go into, that will be used with, will be done with different funding. So all the plan of buildings is together. I wonder if that is a possibility, or that's too complicated, or how. I'm kind of a global person.
Yeah, you'd probably want to do a more of a separate assessment and compilation of those other identified projects that aren't facility LTFM eligible, and get cost estimates on that. And so we could certainly, some of those we've already kind of informally done. We've talked about secure entrances and some of those other things that have come up, and we have cost estimates. So we can certainly track those in a similar manner. Obviously, the completion of those becomes more challenging because of the funding limitations. But I think we'd want to keep those as two separate reports, just so that it's clean in terms of what we're tracking and coding for the state purposes and reporting back.
All right, Zach, it looks like you're next. You're good, Zach?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Al, you'd be next.
So I just want to add that in finance, we did ask the people from ICH, was it? ICS, if their report that they gave to us, what they had looked at for that report and how extensive it was. And they did answer that the majority of what they looked at were like structural or major projects. So they were looking at parking lots and roofs and building exteriors for tuck pointing and windows and things, major pieces of the LTFM and things that would really make an impact on the budget. But they were not looking at the smaller items that we talk about a lot of times in finance and in board meetings. And that's the stuff that you're mentioning, Monica, some of the smaller projects, like walking into a school, or let's just say like a bathroom that it's 40 years old and it just really needs to be redone. But it's not in any budget, because when they walked through and did their assessment, they didn't really feel that was something that they would need to do. And so we added the dollars in so that we would be able to tackle some of those projects and bring schools a little bit more up to date and maintain them a little bit better, and just keep them really looking like a place that you would want to send your kids. And curb appeal type projects that would fall under LTFM. So that was the thinking behind that.
Thank you, Al. Les, you'd be next.
I have no questions, Al. I'm sorry, Jeff, thank you.
All right, thanks, Les. Natalie, do you have any questions?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Chair.
All right, I also don't have any questions because I was at the Finance Committee, and I agree with what Monica and Al just said, and Les was there too. All right, you want to go on to the next part, Amy?
Yeah, so now we'll go through the preliminary list of 21, 22 projects, and I'm going to turn it over to Gary to go over this part. Just one disclaimer, some of the projects when we get into the site-specific projects are identified currently based on ICS's plan. If as we're going through some of that, curb appeal assessment, we decide that, from a visual standpoint and how the building looks, there's a building that's a greater need. There's some flexibility to flip-flop, projects that are currently identified at 21, 22 and push those back a year and move up a different school. So just an awareness that as we go through this, some of the projects may be preliminary and may end up getting switched after we do those walkthroughs.
Okay, so what you're looking at here is a preliminary budget, and these are broad categories. Obviously, there are projects pulled from the plan that make up these numbers, but these are just kind of the broad brush strokes of the types of things that we'll be looking at in 2021, 2022. Health and safety, those would be things that would include, fire suppression, asbestos abatement, some of those types of things. When we look at a playground, it might be the matting underneath. That would be a safety piece of it. The playground wouldn't be eligible unless it's a replacement, but the matting underneath would fall under health and safety. So it'd be those types of things. Salaries and professional services. Some of our staff their salaries or portions of their salaries can be coded under LTFM. So our director, Matt, part of his salary, Joe, our district engineer, some of his health and safety pieces are under there, part of the clerical, and then some of the inspections that we do fall underneath that too. Paving projects, we do paving projects almost every year. This year you'd see in the 2021 projects, you'd see Lincoln, Westwood, Oak Hill are all getting done this year. Next one, HVAC repairs. This is different than that 2023 amount that Amy talked about with the HVAC replacements. This would be just repairs on HVACs, blowers, those types of things. Plumbing repairs, various plumbing needs that we have. Building signage, this one kind of plays into the whole curb appeal. Making sure that we have good signage that conveys our message, that directs people into the right place. Currently, we're looking at three areas of digital signs: Westwood, North, Quarry View. Some of those digital signs get a little bit pricey. They're $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 a piece, so it doesn't take long to get to these dollar amounts. When you look at a school like McKinley, if you walk around McKinley, you'll find that at three different entrances, the building is called three different things. That's confusing to folks. So, this is where we would have budget to go correct that. Concrete repairs, we've done a number of our schools. We've done the safe routes to schools assessment, and an outside group comes and takes a look at our routes to school, our sidewalks, and are they accessible? Are there cracks? Are there bubbles in the sidewalk? Those types of things. And things will pit out. I mentioned McKinley before. There's a ramp on the north end of McKinley that's all pitted out, and that needs to be repaired. So it's just district-wide, those types of things. Every year you see the LED lighting. I think we all know that LED is a more efficient way of lighting. To relamp everything in a district this size takes some time. And there definitely is a payback on that because it is more efficient. Lincoln distribution panels, that's electrical. That's kind of a major rewiring that those need to be replaced. We'll go to the next one, Tammy. The Apollo Stadium repairs, we've got some leakage there. This is a good example. If we don't address it, that it's going to cost us a lot more in the long run. As soon as it's identified, we want to take a look at this. Lincoln roof hatch, that's actually kind of a safety concern. There's an electrical wire close to there, so that needs to be redone. Tuck pointing, like mentioned before, this is, we do this in a lot of buildings. This is just making sure that the exterior of the building is sealed up, and you'll see, a number of schools each year. Roofing, Amy had mentioned that these tend to be big projects. We've got projected for South and at Apollo, and for Apollo, it would just be the portions of the roof that wouldn't be disturbed in a future referendum, because we won't want to replace the roof and then tear it up again. Go ahead, Tammy. And these are some of those projects where they're pulled from the list, but as we get closer, we'll take a look and see if there are other areas that are in higher need at the time. But going through the plan, these were the ones that were pulled. And you'll see this each year, where we're replacing flooring and ceiling and resurfacing floors. This year, gym floors being resurfaced. Westwood and Madison cafeterias are getting new flooring. The South Media Center's getting new carpet. And those are all in the 2020, 2021 projects. That's why you don't see them here. And then there's an unallocated amount, because things come up that we need to address. We may be doing a project at one school and we want to continue going. I think a good example of this would be if you've driven around Apollo lately. We're doing a lot of work out at Apollo with trying to get rid of the rust, work on the sprinkler system, rust removal. And over the years, the rust is built up on all the fencing. And so as long as we're doing that, we might as well complete the project and replace all the fencing there. And so that's what's going on at Apollo currently. And I think that's our list. So any questions?
All right, we'll start off with Natalie, because I seen you had one on chat.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So a while back this school year, some parents in a meeting I was at were discussing the safe routes to school specifically for South, with some concerns for kids crossing the street. Can someone who has knowledge of that kind of tell me where we are with that?
Sure, I'd be glad to.
Thanks, Gary.
So that one's a little tricky, because the concern is actually a number of blocks away from South. It's over on 9th Avenue South. And so what we have is we have crosswalks on 9th and University Drive, and we have a crosswalk further down. Well, the students, a straight line home doesn't go through either one of those crosswalks. It goes in between. So the difficulty comes, it's not our roadway. It's the city roadway. You'll see if you go on 25th Avenue North and 10th Street North. For years, we always had a crossing guard at that intersection, a city intersection. 2-lane road with a stop sign and a crosswalk. It's safe to put someone out there to stop traffic. We just don't have that on 9th Avenue South between those two crosswalks, where we'd have 4 lanes, and we really can't put a school staff member out there blocking traffic. We'd actually be creating more of a hazard. And so what we've done is we've met with Steve Foss, from the city, brought up the concern. They have it on their long-range plan, where they're going to reroute some roads over there. They heard our concerns. that's a number of years down the road. Last week, I reached out to the area planning organization to see if there was any funds from Safe Routes to School where those could be applied for. Again, it would need to be the city applying because it's not our roadway, but we would work with them on it. So we haven't found a solution yet. We're still searching. We've looked at bus shuttles. We're looking at all options.
Thank you, Gary. Natalie, anything else?
No, sir. Thank you very much.
Les, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Natalie's question. Several years down the road seems to be not a good answer. And I would hate to have somebody hit by a car and then all of a sudden everybody starts scrambling trying to fix this thing. We might want to push the issue and I mean, rather than just let the thing sit at somewhere down the road, get it fixed in this year or next year, maybe this year, before the accident. So just, if you can do that, Gary, it's not one of those things that I think should be on the back burner.
And I totally agree. That's why we reached out to the area planning organization to see if there's another funding source. We haven't given up on it yet.
Well, maybe Mr. Jett might want to have a conversation with the mayor about it. I mean, not just suggesting that we not sit on this. So, okay, thank you.
Also, I was going to say that the group of parents, I can reach out to them and also have them advocate with the city as well. I mean, if that's, I didn't know until this moment that that's where we were at with it. And so I kind of know the leader of the group that came to me, so I'll reach out to her as well. And Gary just put her in touch with you.
Oh,
and she would be happy to advocate. So thank you.
So I need to jump in real quick. So this exact group, the exact folks that you're talking about, has already met with us as a district administration. We let them know the progress and where we were at with it. And we gave them the direct line to the city, Natalie, so that way they were advocating. In other words, so they were already advocating. So we met with this group of parents within the last 6 to 8 weeks and had this exact same kind of conversation.
How come you're always on top of everything? I just can't catch you.
Hey, there are
Thanks, Willie.
Time. You are welcome.
Al, do you have any questions?
I just want to ask Amy on the LED lighting. In the past, we've always gotten a number of rebates, and sometimes it's been almost 100% paid for. And if it hasn't been, we've been able to do it through a payback period. And what is it? It's almost like it's an energy savings payment to pay for those projects. Is that something we'd use here or no?
Not generally. Typically when you're doing those energy payback, you're doing it because you don't have other funding options available. And so instead of using an existing LTFM or something like that, you would issue bonds up front to do those projects and then pay back the bonds over energy savings. And we do have still one outstanding certificate of participation that was issued I think it was probably 2012 now, that actually gets paid out of the general fund every year. And that should be paid off here pretty soon. But typically if we have the room within LTFM, we don't. And then if we do get energy rebates back, those energy rebates go back to our operating capital fund.
All right, Zach, do you have any questions? All right.
No, sorry.
Tammy, can you get that question screen off the thing? And then Monica, do you have any questions?
I just wanted to follow up with the paths, the path things that Natalie brought up. So Gary, at some point when I was part of this health wellness committee, there was a grant for bicycle routes and path that Blendon came in with, and I wonder if if you can help me with the history of that grant, where was the use and it did not. I thought that part of the project was bring some collaboration with the city about doing all these paths.
It's a good question. So that's the Safe Routes to School grant, I believe you're referring to.
Yes.
We've done worked with them on a number of schools, and the grant was to do the assessment to identify areas of concern, possible projects, and then within there they rank those as high, medium, or low concern, and then that's where now we work with them to say, this is a project that we'd like to undertake, help us find some funding. And so then that's the next phase of working with them.
So are you saying that this is a possibility of funding for that?
For the south, the concern on the south?
Yes.
Yeah, there are two possible funding sources, one federal and one state. The federal is a full grant. The state grant is like a 20% match. They'll cover 80%. Both are competitive grants. They've sent us information on both of those. The state one is the application process traditionally has been October, and that's the one that I've been conversing with the APO on.
All right, Shannon, do you have any questions?
I have one question about the unallocated funds. How does the board know where what they were spent on, and when we're seeing projects come through that's coming out of that pot?
So typically, if that were to end up being allocated to a project over 100,000, you would see that come through as a call for bid. So you would see a call for bids, and it would indicate that it's being that the funding source is coming from long-term facilities maintenance revenue. So that's one way that they come through the board. If they are, larger scale projects, if they're smaller, we don't bring every individual project through for board approval. But certainly once we do those walkthroughs and identify those high need areas, we could certainly report back to the board about, here's what we found in terms of where our highest need is as it relates to that curb appeal and that, welcoming, inviting atmosphere, and provide an update, or that could be done through the board email update communication. So there's multiple ways that we can certainly relay that information. Generally, every year, there's always some level of projects that come up, partially just because it may not have been identified as needing to be replaced for 3 years, and all of a sudden the repairs are becoming astronomical. And so, if something faults earlier than ICS's report says, we're obviously replacing those on an emergency basis quite often. And so not everything's going to come to the board for approval, similar to how with the general fund operating budget, not every purchase comes specifically to the board. It would be more of an after the fact report back.
Shannon says, thank you, Amy. All right, I have no questions either. Is both of you done with your informational thing?
Yeah, so I think we just kind of want a general consensus that the board is comfortable bringing back for approval in July at the $7.5 million, which is that roughly 2% levy increase, because once we only have one board meeting in July, and it has to be sent into the Department of Ed by the end of July. And so I didn't hear any questions or concerns on that, but just want to make sure before we move on to the next agenda item that there's no concerns with that coming forward at the next meeting.
All right, having seen or heard none either, we will move on. And if anybody has a concern, I'll ask Amy an email. All right, thank you. Next up is item number B, school updates. It's going to be done by Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, and Dr. Laura Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education. Go ahead, ladies.
Good evening, Chair Paul Reese, Superintendent Jett, and members of the board. We are both going to share some highlights in terms of activities and just some really positive things that happened during distance learning. So I'm going to start out by talking about elementary activities that are happening this summer with PAC-RAT and PAC-CAT. Sarah Martini worked with Bruce Henches and Melissa Hanzek-Brill from St. Cloud State University, who started the PAC-CAT program last summer. And they managed to obtain several very generous donations and grants, and were able to order $5,000 worth of books to give away to our students, in addition to the amazing donation of about 1,500 books from United Way already. Melissa is ordering math supplies and creating math games that students will also receive. They will be teaming with the Yes Network, our Boys and Girls Club and club locations and Kids Stop to deliver books to our students that they will be able to keep, as well as the math kits. And they plan to start deliveries the week of July 13th. They'll deliver books and math kits until they run out. So we're really excited that this is going to be happening this summer, and we are so grateful to our community partners for making this happen. We couldn't be more thankful. Next slide, Tammy. So you all know that Seesaw was our learning platform, and I just wanted to give you some numbers. So all-time teacher posts during the distance learning period was 830,711, and all-time family connections was 122,116. I've already shared with you some of the cool things that teachers were doing, but tonight I'd like to highlight with you what one of our elementary principals did. And as a goodbye to her staff, one of the things that Principal Kate Flynn did was to share examples of her staff's great work during distance learning in a video that was created. It's a great tribute, not only to the Madison staff, but all the elementary staff and the ways that they work to provide learning to students in an unfamiliar platform. And they not only just did it, but it was their moment to shine. So I'd like to share that video with you. And Miss Tammy, I think Tammy or Gary is gonna get that ready for us. I'm so grateful, thank you.
You've tamed the voices in your head. You've put your courage to the test. Laid all your doubts to rest. Your mind is clearer than before. Your heart is full and wanting more. Your future's at the door. Give it all you got. No hesitating. You've been waiting all your life. This is your moment. This is your moment. Than it's ever been, and now it's more than just a win. It's where your life begins. Yeah, there's no holding back, no overthinking. win. And now it's more than just a win, it's where your life begins. I know where you're coming from, a long road and the money's gone. All the games where you played your part from the very start just to come this far. You should know I believe in you. Every race you run, you're my number one. Kick it up now and bring it on. This will be your day. 'Cause baby, you were born to win. Never give up, never give in. You were born to win. Your destiny is victory. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Baby, 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 yeah, yeah, yeah. Baby, you were born to win. You set it up and you knock it down. You're all set now to rock this town. You don't really need to play it low. Just get up and go. This is all your show. You should know I believe in you. Every race you run, you're my number one.
Thank you, Marcia. That was amazing. I hadn't gotten to see that yet. Tammy is going to pull the presentation back up for secondary. And while she was doing that, Principal Harris and I were invited to speak at the Partner for Student Success United Way virtual bus tour. And one of the questions they asked me was, what was the hardest part of distance learning on teachers? And without a doubt, that was the easiest question I got. And I said, it's missing their students. That weighed so heavy on their hearts. And for coaches, it was exactly the same. Our coaches love our students just as much as our teachers and other staff do, and they miss them. And our kids missed being out there. So it was a very exciting day on Monday when activities were able to start again. So you can see here, there are photos of some of our students who came back for optional practice. Each coach was allowed to provide or was asked to provide a plan that was reviewed for health and safety. So all of our coaches sent in plans that require students to stay 6 feet apart, to be in pods. They're all screened. They have their temperatures taken. And then, of course, there's no contact at this time. So lots of health and conditioning. And our events take place inside in the gyms and then outside. And then swimming starts on Monday. So that was a very exciting week for us in secondary, and so we wanted to show that to you. And then, like Marcia, we wanted to show you a brief video because there are so many creative ways that our staff connected with students and families and tried to make the best of a tough situation. And so tonight we wanted to show you 1 minute of the virtual concert that was put on by Anita Boster, band teacher at South. And so Gary is going to pull that up, and so give you a chance to see how that works. And while he's doing that, I'll just let you know that it happened at other schools as well. So we just want to give you a quick taste of some of the creativity and the instruction that managed to happen, even though we were in distance learning. And we are, of course, open to any questions that you might have this evening.
Lori, I want to say I apologize for mispronouncing your first name at the beginning. First up will be Shannon. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Lori, I have a question about we're starting up activities again, and there was an article in the St. Cloud Times somebody asked me about, and I apologize, I didn't see the article. It wasn't about our district in particular, it was about our district as well as other districts starting, I think, athletic activities. And there were some pictures in there, and they were wondering if maybe those pictures were not to date because they didn't quite match the message that we were giving. Is that correct?
I didn't see the article, Shannon, but that would be my guess because activities did not start again for us until 9 o'clock on Monday morning. And I was out there. I know Superintendent Jett was out and Adam Holm were out at the high schools, and we each observed all of our students and our staff, coaching staff, being really diligent about following social distancing guidelines and health screening. So I would not think that those would be accurate photos of recent activities from our district.
Okay, thanks. That was my answer to them, that sometimes the pictures don't happen to match the current times. That certainly we were in compliant and are in compliant. So thank you.
Thank you.
Monica, you'd be next. Monica?
Thank you so much for those wonderful presentations. I appreciate that you join us that part. I also, so looking at the agenda of the purpose of the presentations, I wanted to learn a little bit more about, as I asked you before, I think, about the challenges and what was working great or not. So I know this is just kind of an information on this, but kind of wanted to continue to understand how have you evaluated this process or what happened during this year. And I am interested in understanding better what children got affected, how negatively or not negatively. There are children that you told us before that are actually thriving in this environment. So I just kind of how do I understand more what happened? So just I don't know if you have an answer right now. I guess this wasn't part of the presentation, but I'm just expecting to get that in the future, and maybe you can tell me when are you planning on doing that?
We do have a distance learning presentation coming up to share the ins and outs of who it worked for, why it worked, when it didn't work. So I can tell you how activities went this week and share a little bit about some of the challenges. With music, you saw one example of certainly a challenge, and then a way that our staff overcame that and our students overcame that. But in terms of a full analysis of that will be upcoming with Dr. Huff and our team.
All right, Zach, do you have any questions? Okay. Al?
There it goes. I have a comment, not so much questions, but just I sent Willie a note today, or an article today that showed that Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who's been one of the slowest to open up the state, announced today that K-12 schools would be open in the fall for students to attend. And so I took that as a positive note and something that we could probably look forward to here. Put all this behind us.
Thank you, Al. Les?
Just a comment, I was concerned that Dr. Beisch was not very enthusiastic about her presentation. Well done, thank you so much. It's good to see you excited about something.
And Natalie, any questions?
No, I'll agree with Les. I'm like, now that is a person who must love being an elementary teacher right there. That is not my gift. I like the middle school angst. Yeah, so I just wanted to say on the activities thing, my son went to football practice this week for the first time. He's extremely sore after sitting in this house for 3 months. But it's just so wonderful for him to be able to get back together with his friends, and he's making the transition from middle school to high school. And what I really appreciated and what I want to give props to our coaches for is just the reaching out that they've done with these kids. So my son would set his alarm to get up to be on a Zoom call for football. I mean, they have to set their alarm if they need to get up before noon, let's be real. But to be able to have, like, the coaches mapping out the defensive plays on Zoom call. And, you know, he's saying, okay, defense, D-line's going to meet this time, O-line's going to meet this time. And, you know, of course it's not ideal, right? But to have that connection, that's been really wonderful. And I think
see what you look like on camera.
That transition has been really great. So thanks, Lori. And thank you, Marcia, for your enthusiasm.
It's definitely been a team effort. Adam Holm and the principals, the ADs, the coaches, they've just really pulled together. And like I said, they miss these kids, and so they miss their students. So they're really grateful to be able to see them again in person.
I just hope you all took note that one teacher was in her bathtub using her exposure as her whiteboard. I mean, that's innovative, don't you think?
Yeah. And that was permanent marker too, wasn't it?
You know, there is a way to get permanent marker off things. If you want to know, I'll tell you later.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ladies, for a great presentation. Glad to hear good things are happening this summer already. With that, we will move on to section 3. It's our discussion and/or action items. First up is an action item. It's item number A. It's the bid award for the sale of MacBook Air computers.
Yes, so this is an item that a lot of times, this isn't a new item, so we did this last year at this time. We've been slowly phasing out of MacBooks just due to the high cost and the sustainability, and trying to have a consistent device for our secondary 6 through 12. We have switched over to Chromebooks. This year we had 2 classes remaining who still had MacBooks. We want to still make sure that we're using them for the 4-year cycle, and that, you know, we're getting the maximum use out of them. And so this year's seniors, we've collected all of those devices thanks to a lot of hard work from Lori and her secondary principals and Gary and his technology team. We actually, I think we're at almost 95% collection rate, which, considering we're trying to collect them in a drop-off virtual environment, is amazing. And so we had the bid this year. When we did the bids last year, we had some pretty favorable results, more than budgeted. We were anticipating it probably being a pretty good bidding environment for the sale of these devices this year, just given the high demand for devices. And I know that was a question that came up from a couple of board members. And so just want to kind of give the foundation for everybody as to why we're selling devices when right now, you know, everyone is trying to get devices. With the fact that we're already in a 1-to-1 program for 612, Really, our lack of devices and our shortfall falls at elementary. We've bought some devices already last year for elementary. We have a middle level plan to early phase in the Chromebooks so that we can retask the current middle level iPads down to elementary. And so we've got plans in place for that. And really, what we're selling here is MacBook Air laptops, which wouldn't be an appropriate K5 device. The K5 really needs the Chromebooks with the touchscreen or an iPad. So that's one factor is just the device itself not being suitable for elementary. And also the fact that it has a 4-year, it's already been used in service for 4 years. And so it's really reaching the end of its useful life, and repairs on MacBooks especially are increasingly expensive and take a large amount out of the budget for repairs. When we went to go to bid, just for an awareness, we had, there's a tabulation attached. We had probably about 3 times as many companies bid on it this year as we did last year. And I think that's just a reflection of the high demand for any sort of devices, particularly for schools who aren't one-to-one, for their secondary students are really struggling. And so the resale companies have high demand. They can sell them at a premium, even if they're 4-year-old devices. And so we had budgeted $135,000. And so really the amount that we budgeted to come in is part of the budget for operating capital. And so it's intended to cover the replacement of the portion of the funding in the replacement for the new Chromebooks. You'll see the high bid came in at just over $223,000. And so we had budgeted getting roughly $225 per device. We ended up with $372 per device, which is essentially the cost of us purchasing a brand new Chromebook. And so we almost 1-for-1 with selling the MacBooks, could then repurchase elementary devices. And so we'll find as we start to piece together what we need for fall, if we need additional devices. We have a number of options. We can look at our CARES funding, and we can certainly look to the surplus that's coming in from the sale of these as an additional venue if we need to purchase additional elementary devices. And so really, we're just looking for approval then to award the bid.
Does anybody have any questions?
Jeff, I would move that we approve the bid for the sale of MacBook Air computers.
I will second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Les, would you take roll, please?
Turn on that microphone. Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes, yes.
Annan Hawes,
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt,
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Jeff Polreis.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Amy. And you are up for all 3. So next one up will be item B, approval of the 2019-2020 revised budget. Go ahead, Amy.
Yep, and Tammy's going to pull up the PowerPoint. Here it comes. So the first item is the revised current year budget. And so we'll look at revenues first. And so what you're seeing on the screen is the original budget that the board would have approved last year in June for 1920. And then there's an adjustment column for any budget adjustments that need to be approved. And then you'll see the revised budget, which is what is being approved tonight. So for the general fund, every year in the general operations budget, we have budget adjustments, and they're primarily due to increases in our various grants, specifically our federal grants. The majority of that $848,000 budget adjustment is due to additional Title I funds and the new Title IV funds that weren't included in the original budget. when we get to the next slide here in a few minutes, you'll see that there's a pretty similar dollar amount corresponding expenditure increase for the same amount. So we tend to do the budget and we project conservatively on our federal grants until we know what those entitlements are. We always want to be in a position where we have additional funds to spend versus overestimating what those award amounts are going to be and then trying to make reductions or adjust once the entitlements come out over the summer. The capital, it's not real common that we have revenue adjustments in operating capital. This year we do, and it's two things primarily. About half of that is the sale of Wilson, and so we have a budget adjustment to accommodate that. And then we had additional E-rate reimbursements on some of the big technology projects that we had done that came in that exceeded the original budget for E-rate. And so that's the reason that we have a large revenue adjustment in operating capital this year. In the other funds, food service and community service are both just a reflection of various grants. Food service is the fresh fruit and vegetable grant. Every year when we budget without that because we don't know yet if we'll get approved and what sites get approved. And so that's an annual budget adjustment. You'll see there's an expenditure adjustment for the exact same amount. And then the only other budget adjustment we have this year is the trust fund. And then again, that's an annual, that's our scholarship fund. And so we budget conservatively. And then if we end up with more donations and scholarships in and out, then we adjust that. That's another one where when we get to the expenditure budget, you'll see has an expenditure revision for the exact same amount. So if we go to the next page then, and so really, this is, for the most part, the general fund we talked about, that increase is really just the offset for the revenue increase, primarily coming from title programs. Operating capital, the increase there is really just spend down of prior year fund balance. And so we allow buildings and departments to carry over funds from year to year. And that way they're allowed to build up. And so if they have a larger ticket item, a big portion of that budget adjustment is some of those teaching and learning funds that have been accumulating that we're going to be using this year and next year to do some of those curriculum review cycle implementation pieces. And so that's really, like I said, just a number of different departments and buildings exercising and using their prior year carryover funds. We talked about food service, community service, and the trust fund. Those adjustments are all just the offsets to those revenue, the expense side of those grants. And then you'll see a large budget adjustment for building construction. The reason for that is simply a timing difference. When we set the original 19-20 budget last June, we didn't know, obviously, yet at that point where our last year, 18-19, expenses would be, where the project would be, how far along payments would be. And so we had kind of roughly estimated that 24.9 million was what we would end up spending this year. We ended up with quite a bit more than that recorded and expensed last year. And so that's the reason for the significant budget reduction, is just to align that with how much of the project was actually left in 19-20. And then the last slide, we're not going to spend a lot of time on. It really just shows these revenue and expenditure budget adjustments and how that will impact and how that ends up resulting in ending projected fund balance. And you'll see pretty much across the board that we're not anticipating significant fund balance changes from where we were at last year's audit to where we're at this year's audit, with the exception of course, the building construction fund, obviously declining significantly as the tech project has been completed. Are there any questions on the 19-20 revised budget?
We will start off with Shannon. Go ahead, Shannon.
No, I do not.
You do not?
Yep.
All right, Les?
No, thank you.
Al?
No.
Zach,
No, thank you.
Monica,
No questions.
Natalie.
No, thank you, Jeff.
I just had one, Amy, on the food service budget.
Mhm.
There's a lot of unknowns, right, based on what's happening this summer and stuff?
So the food service budget, essentially there is some unknowns in terms of where that's going to land. However, we now have our entitlements for the ESSER funds. And so the board and the district are going to have a number of options in terms of if the food service fund ends at a deficit as we go to close out the year, how do we cover that? We can cover that from an existing fund balance. We can potentially code some of those costs to our federal CARES Act funding. And so at the end of the day, the food service fund for the year is going to end up one way or the other at essentially a break even, because you can't have it end or it would potentially end a deficit and pull some of those reserve fund balances. But once we know what that actual impact is, then and we see what we have for other needs in terms of going to fall and getting ready for whatever fall might look like, we'll make those determinations and recommendations and bring that to the board about where do we pull that from, and do we want to tap into just the food service fund balance? Do we want to tap into other fund balances? And so we have a number of options at our disposal. One item that was actually not on our radar as an option until a conversation I had with the Department of Ed today is that you can actually use your unspent LTFM funds and transfer that to cover deficits. They opened that up as an allowable fund transfer, and we actually have a fair amount of our current year LTFM funds that we weren't able to spend just because of COVID and projects getting delayed and not being able to get items. And so because that's already levied and that's already funds that are coming to the district, we have that potentially at our disposal as an option too. All of those transfers will have to come to the board for approval, and we'll be bringing those through board finance and through the board likely in August and September as we start to get to audit and close out the year.
All right, thank you much. We are looking for a motion to approve the revised 2019-2020 budget.
So moved.
All right, Natalie, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Al. Les, would you mind taking roll call, please?
Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt,
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Jeff Polarize,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Just for a matter of clarification, whenever the presentation's done, can you take off the presentation sheet, and that way I can view the tiled so I can see all the board members, please?
Oh,
thanks, Tammy. All right, next up is item C. It's the approval of the 2020-21 budget. Amy will be presenting again.
yeah, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time going through all of these numbers because we went through it at the work session in detail, but we'll just summarize through quickly. So what you're looking at on this slide is the general fund, which again is composed of those three separate funds: operating, transportation, and operating capital. And that kind of second to the bottom number there is the bottom line activity for the year. And so we're essentially budgeting all of those to be relatively small surpluses. We obviously don't want to budget for a deficit, but we want to make sure that we're spending our resources to make sure that we have all of our needs covered. And so total there is just over 61,000 net surplus for the general fund. Moving to the next page is our special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are food service and community education. Again, these budgets are assuming full funding, assuming normal operations. Obviously, if we end up in some sort of non-traditional instructional delivery model for fall, we'll be coming back to the board to discuss, particularly in these two funds, how those budgets need to get amended if we're not operating at normal. But the budget was prepared based on normal operating. And so,
oh, it's not scrolling down. Oh,
we can go to the next page. Capital Projects Fund is starting to wind down, and so we'll have the majority of the funds related to tech, the tech bond spent as of the end of the fiscal year 20. What you see there in the expenditures, $2,435,000. The $435,000 is the camera project again that the board approved previously, and then the $2 million is the remaining tech funds, which may or may not be obligated within the year, but we put it there as an expenditure in case there's some sort of desire to spend those funds on a project. And then the ending projected fund balance is the remainder of those capital bond proceeds. And then the next slide, debt service fund. We're not going to spend much time on that. That one's pretty self-explanatory. It's just set based on our principal and interest, and the levy is set accordingly. Then the last slide is our internal service funds, OPEB, dental, and health insurance. And again, these are projected very similar to current year operations, and all of those funds operating at a healthy point currently. And so that is it, unless there are questions on the 2021 budget.
all right. We will start off with Al. Al, I seen you had one.
Yes, I do. Question is, does this budget reflect the change to the LTFM budget for 2020, 2021?
So the change for the LTFM budget is actually for 21-22, because when the board's approving the LTFM budget, they're approving it in advance of the levy cycle. And so the 2021 LTFM budget is already set at the $6,785,000. That was the budget the board approved last December. There's always a delay.
There's always a catch. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Zach, do you have any questions? All right. Monica?
No questions.
Shannon? No questions. Shannon said no. Natalie?
No, thank you.
Les?
No, thank you.
All right, I have none as well. I was at the Finance Committee, heard it all. We are now looking for a motion to approve the 2020-2021 budget as Amy just discussed. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Natalie, do I have a second? Sorry, Amy.
I'll second.
Shannon seconds it. All right, Les, would you mind taking roll, please?
Natalie Ringsmuth?
Yes.
Zach Dorhold?
Yes.
Les Green is yes. Jeff Polreis?
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz?
Yes.
Al Dahlgren?
Yes.
Shannon Hawes?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Les. We will now move into section 4 reports. First up will be Superintendent's report by Willie Jett.
Good evening, Chair Polreis, members of the board. First and foremost, several students from Tech Senior High School recently received recognition for their outstanding performance in the year-long session of the stock market game. These students participated in the Minnesota High School division of the stock market game, and they were in Craig Acock's class and Craig Swanberg. The 3rd and 5th place teams were taught by Mr. Acock, and the 4th place team, also including students Lauren Hobday, and Richard Zimring. And that class was taught by Mr. Swanberg. The Stock Market Game is a national interactive learning program for students in grades 4 through 12, managed locally by Minnesota nonprofit Best Prep. Students work in teams to invest a virtual $100,000 over a 14-week period, competing with other students for the highest valued portfolio. Second, Tech graduate Winston Johnson and his parents wrote and produced the song 2020 Vision to honor his graduation. Kara Levin's Land of 10,000 Stories did a story on him and his family. It aired on the 10 o'clock news on Sunday, June 14th. Many of us witnessed that. And a link to the story is on our district website. Next, recent graduate Tyler Flanders has a green thumb. He has been the mastermind behind the InStep program's annual plant sale since the year 2016. InStep is a specialized transition program for 18 to 20-year-olds with moderate to severe disabilities. Its staff and students took Flanders' plant sale idea and helped him grow it every year. Mr. Flanders, and I'll say Tyler, was determined to have the InStep annual plant sale this year despite COVID-19. And you can read all about it and how he did it on our district blog. Next, District 742 and the following schools received PBIS exemplar status: Clearview, Kennedy, Lincoln, North, Oak Hill, Quarryview, and Westwood. Minnesota schools and districts were invited to apply for the Positive Behavioral Intervention Supports Recognition System. The purpose of this system or this recognition is to identify and recognize exemplar schools and districts that have completed PBIS implementation and are continuing to achieve positive student outcomes. To be identified for PBIS district recognition, the districts must demonstrate capacity for coordination, training, coaching, and evaluation to support schools implementing PBIS. St. Cloud Area School District is one of 6 recognized school districts in the state. Last but not least, you saw me step away from the screen and I received a phone call, and it was the Commissioner of Education, Miss Mary Catherine Rickard. And so when I looked down on my phone and saw that it was the commissioner, I thought one of 2 things. A, what did I do wrong and what was I in trouble for? Or B, maybe she was going to give me the inside scoop on something that I'd be able to share as it relates to this meeting. And what was nice about the call, she was just calling to check on us. Okay, she was calling to check on St. Cloud area schools at approximately 7:30 on June 17th, 7:30 p.m. What I will tell you is, I believe, and maybe she makes me feel special and she does this for everybody, but I honestly believe that she took care of us and she's always paid us attention. She's been in attendance at different events in our district. She has ties to this district and families in this area. And so there it was, she was calling to check on us. She's been paying attention to the news, wanted to give me a couple things in terms of planning for the future. And she told me, Willie, what I'm saying to you, I'm not going to say out, you're not going to repeat that out loud. And so folks, sorry, but I have a muzzle. And so with that being said, that concludes my superintendent's report.
Thank you, Willie. It's nice to hear that somebody is obviously watching this live stream too. Way to go, Commissioner. Next up, we will do committee reports. Board Development, Policy and Governance, Shannon Hawes is the chair. She said she doesn't have one tonight. Al, for Finance, do you have one?
I sure do. We had a meeting on June 11th, which was last week, Thursday. We had 4 items on the agenda. The first thing was the tech change orders, which we reviewed and approved tonight. Yeah, we didn't review them at this meeting, but we reviewed them at our meeting, and they were approved in the consent agenda this evening. There was 3 change orders, and they were all pretty much things that had to be done. Second thing we reviewed, we also approved in the consent agenda this evening, and that's transportation contracts, and there's a total of 5 contracts. We eliminated the assistant transportation coordinator position a few years ago, and now are using the Center for Effective School Operations, a transportation consulting firm. We went out this year and we did RFPs for transportation services in the first time in a long time. And CESO was asked to do the specs for the RFPs. After determining that there were routes still not covered, we reached out to other transportation vendors and received a proposal for the remaining bus routes needed. After proposals were received, CESO negotiated the details of the contracts. 2 of the contractors agreed to a 4-year contract, while the other 3 agreed to a 2-year contract with an option to extend for another 2 years. To keep the price increase minimal in the first year, some of the contracts show a higher amount in subsequent years. The total increase in transportation contracts for 2021 is approximately 8%, which Jamie has budgeted for. Rich and Ken from CESO stated that they are looking at adding a GPS location program to buses in District 742. And this would enable parents to track buses on the app and also to notify parents all at once when there's a situation regarding a bus. And I think that's a really cool thing where parents can watch and see where those buses are right down to the street and either send their kids out to get on the bus or know that their kids know exactly where they are and when they're going to be home or when to expect them to be home. So that'd be a great addition to our buses. The next thing I won't go through in detail because Amy did, but it was the 10-year long-term facilities maintenance plan. And last on our list was an Apple computer lease. This was also on the consent agenda this evening. And it was the approval of the option to lease staff computers from Apple rather than purchasing them. And it's a budget neutral item, but Apple requires that the board approve it. And it made sense to not purchase the computers. We're able to replace them easier, and it was a better deal for us, and they're doing it at a no interest. So there was no cost to it for us. Aren't we getting some a little bit cheaper, costing a little bit less, Amy, for the same computers?
Yeah, because we're buying them all now, and so instead of having price increases the next few years, you get them all now at current pricing.
Yep, and that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Al. Zach, do you have the report? No? Okay.
No report.
Les, do you have a report?
Yes. Personnel Committee met on June 3rd. Major discussion issue was superintendent's evaluation. We also had some discussion about how to bring the school resource officer program to the board for some discussion. And I believe that eventually that is now coming up on the July 15th board meeting.
Correct.
Okay. So that discussion came up and it found its way to get some discussion. That's my report.
All right, thank you, Les. Natalie, do you have a report from Achievement, Integration, and Equity Committee?
Yes, I do. We met this week and it was a great meeting with a lot of great discussion. We had 3 different goals for the meeting. One was to talk through World's Best Workforce. We reviewed that plan, the current plan, and Lori really shared with us just how that plan is integrated to our equity plan, also our strategic plan. The World's Best Workforce plan is going to be brought to the board in September along with our strategic plan. So this was a review in hopes that we could all be on the same page so that we could present it to the board and go from there. Then we also have been talking around the issue of arts education integration. And as we talked about it, we know as a district and things we've talked about before as a board and leadership team, that we really, there's areas in our schools where our population, our diverse population is not reflected in things like a choir concert, sometimes with after school activities. And we've been working hard as a district to rectify those things along with our community partners. But it's just an ongoing conversation that we're having, and rightly so, in Achievement, Integration, and Equity Committee. That's exactly what we should be talking about. But we are just going to continue to really, as our district does and as our mission says, to look with an equity lens and and concern ourselves with all students to make sure they can survive and thrive and succeed in our district. We also talked about, the last thing we talked about was other topics that are coming up, and we are going to be discussing in July, what are we currently doing for school presentations to the board? Basically, what are the goals of those right now? What are we seeing each time as far as data goes? And then is there anything that's missing? So we definitely are going to be asking for each board member's feedback as well on that. First, we just want to kind of get a clear picture of exactly what's happening with these presentations on a regular basis, and then talk with you guys as well about, you know, what is missing and what would you like to see on a more regular basis. I know, like today, Monica brought up, you know, what were the struggles, and that's one thing we talked about as well in our committee meeting, that, you know, we love to hear the highlights. I mean, there's many highlights in our community and in our schools, but we also want to know the real struggles that we're having, because as a board we want to support those to rise up and be taken care of, and be a partner with our leadership in that. That's, I think, it for right now. We're going to meet on my anniversary, Tuesday, July 21st at 8 a.m.
All right, thank you, Natalie. While I have you on the mic, I'll give you my input. Can you ask that the data we receive be consistent from presentation to presentation, so it's not a different set every time?
Yeah, and actually what we talked about, we talked about as a committee, being able to have Sylvia, have Dr. Huff actually reach out to each board member with 3 or 4 questions, so that then when we get that information from you guys, we can know things like what you said, Jeff, and find those common grounds of what are we all seeing, and then maybe find some things that we haven't talked about. So, but to be able to give a clear outline of what we are doing and then see what we're missing, so we can know where we're going. And our hope is to talk about it now so that we can make some changes if need be coming into fall.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, that concludes the committee reports. Item number 5, future agenda items. There is no future agenda items because we don't have a July work session. We've already talked about a couple of things that are going to be on the July 15th. Which will be our next meeting here at the DAO. The time is 8:11. I will now adjourn tonight's school board meeting. Thank you for your interest. Thank you, Commissioner Wicker, for watching, and everyone be safe.